So welcome everybody. My name is Kai Goosens and I'm a faculty member here, but I'm also part of the Office of Faculty Development. And I wanted to welcome you to the Appointments, Promotions, and Tenure panel, where hopefully we can address all of your questions about this process. So as I mentioned, I'm part of the OFD, and we have two other people from the OFD here who will be talking later. We have Lauren Pecorello, and we also have Emma Ben. And we have three wonderful panelists for you. We have Seema Patel, who is the Dean for Faculty Affairs and Administration. We have Jonathan Halpern, who is the chair for the APT committee. And we also have Rina Karani, who is the director of the IME here at Mount Sinai. So if you can advance to the next slide, Karen. This is an outline of what's going to be happening today. Right now I'm just doing the introduction, but then we will have sort of three sections, each of which will be spearheaded by one of the panelists. And at the very end, we will have a question and answer session. So just before we start the panel, we wanted to point out, in case you don't know what the Office of Faculty Development is, we have some really important programming for faculty. We have that programming in sort of three key areas, which are career advancement, mentorship enrichment, and leadership development. And all of that programming is done with an eye towards enhancing professional fulfillment, diversity, inclusion, equity, and well-being here at Mount Sinai. So if you haven't noticed the OFD events previously, you should keep an eye out in your email. We have lots of events that we sponsor that you can join. So that being said, I think we'll go ahead and start the actual program for the for today. So our first panelist who will be presenting is Seema Patel. Seema, please take it away.
Great, thank you. Welcome everyone. So I'm going to start talking about for the promotion submission process. So very high overview, and if anyone has questions at the end, I'm happy to answer them in the Q&A session. So how the promotions process starts is it starts with your department administrator or coordinator who's handling the appointments and promotions within your own office. And then what they'll do is they'll fill out key portions of the application, which sits in Sinai Central, which I'll show you screenshots here in a little bit. The faculty then faculty gets a link and they submit items such as a CV, reviewers who should be external to Mount Sinai, publications, and if you're on the CPAL track, a matrix. What happens is the application will go back to your department, the coordinator or administrator who initially submitted it, and they'll attach a chair statement signed by your chair. And then that comes back to the appointments and promotions office for review. Next slide, please. Once it gets to our office, we have a pre-evaluation committee that reviews the rank and track for appropriateness. At that point, when they say yes or no, if they say yes, it then goes to your external reviewers, a list of people you provided. They have approximately 3 weeks to respond, and every 3 weeks, if they have not responded with a reviewer letter, we send reminders at that 3-week mark, and they'll continue to get it until a letter has been submitted. Please note, we don't wait for letters from your entire list of external reviewers. We usually 4 to 5, 6 good letters. We will move your application to the full or our research and clinical subcommittee, and then to the full committee. Next slide, please. So here's the Sinai Central application tracker, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. It's just screenshots of what you'll see when you receive the application. So this is just the first screen. You'll see when the link comes to your email box, and then you'll log in with your Mount Sinai username and password to the Sinai Central tracker. Next slide, please. Here's where you'll log in with your username and password. You see where it says attention required. You'll have your application in that list of things that need your attention. Next slide. Here's another actual view. You see back, then you'll see this faculty at transactions. You'll see that your application is sitting with that little blue man. That's what you click on to start populating your items. Next slide. So here you'll see where you'll get the list of things you need, documents. You'll upload your CV. Remember to save. If you don't save it, it will not save your attachment. We also have a bunch of resources that we'll send you a link to later that can help you with CV and templates and reviewer lists, what we require and what we don't require, that will be useful during your application process. Next slide, please. Here's where you will start entering your external reviewers, publications, and the matrix if applicable, which you see here in the little screenshot. Next slide. External reviewers. This is a section based on the rank you are getting promoted on, it'll give you the number of slots to provide. It could be 10 or 15 reviewers that are required for promotions. Next slide. Similarly, here's where you would enter your publications. And again, the number of publications differ by the rank you're proposed at. Next slide. And if a clinical practice addendum is required, you'll have an extra step to complete those documents. And if you're not on this track, you will never see this information. Next slide. And then when you're done with all that, all you have to do is hit submit, and that will send the application back to your department administrator or APT coordinator. Next slide. And these are the resources I mentioned earlier. They will be in the information that's handed out after this webinar. And so you have access to all these different tools and requirements that we've set up. Next slide. All right, I think I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Halpern to talk about the tracks.
Thank you very much, Seema. I'm just going to take a few minutes. There are 4 tracks available for full-time faculty and additional tracks available for members of our voluntary faculty or for those at affiliate institutions. But for folks that are at the primary institutions, there are 4 tracks to consider. May I have the next slide? The governing principles that override all of this are very clear. The objectives of the APT committee are to facilitate advancement of our faculty. We're here to help you get promoted. We want to maintain the academic integrity of the school, which is obviously a tandem concept with respect to advancing people. We want to promote diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. We want our processes to be entirely transparent so that you know what's going on. It's not a black box or a curtain behind which the Wizard of Oz sits. And most pertinent to our discussion today, we want to make sure that all of our faculty are at the appropriate rank and in the right track for the contributions that they're making to the school and to the world as a whole. So let's go to the next slide, please. I'm going to quickly review the characteristics of each of the 4 tracks. One is called the investigator track. It's a conventional academic track where the focus is on discovery and innovation. The expectation is that people on this track will have independent research programs that are generally federally funded under NIH grants, Department of Defense grants, or other federal agencies. There are circumstances under which foundation funding or other types of funding would be considered favorably. The focus here is on conventional scholarship, contributions to education and service to the institution and to the profession. The expectation is that as people rise to senior faculty positions, that is to say, associate professor or full professor, they will have attained a national and ultimately an international reputation for their contributions. And much of the objectives of the external reviewer letters that you will nominate and that we will request is to establish that scope of reputation. This track is distinguished from others because there's a so-called academic track, or academic clock, which sets a maximum time limits at which a given rank can be held. For example, a certain number of years as assistant professor before you must move up to associate professor. And if you're not eligible to go up for associate professor, then either you change track or you leave the institution. And ultimately, the expectation extends even that when you reach the level of professor, a certain maximum number of years is available before you should be tenured. So the expectation is that professors will eventually be tenured on this track. Let's go to the next slide, please. The research track are for faculty members that are playing a key role on a research team. They may be leading a shared research or core facility. They contribute to obtaining research funding, but they may not be necessarily the principal investigator. They certainly contribute to scholarship and should have authorship or co-authorship of research papers in respected scientific journals. They should be co-authors of the research reports that emanate from the research in which they participate. They should be recognized for presentations at meetings outside the institution at national or international venues. And again, there's the expectation of scope of reputation. Here, professors are expected to have a national reputation, and tenure is available for people on this track. May I have the next slide? What SEMA referred to as the CPAL track is the clinical practice and/or administrative leadership track. This is for faculty members who devote at least 90% of their time to patient care or clinical administration or training or laboratory management in leadership positions. For those who provide patient care, the expectation is that they will be recognized as a master clinician. We expect that people in this track will rise to leadership roles. We very much value their contributions to teaching, but conventional scholarship publications is not a necessary criterion for advancement on this track. These are folks that are toiling in the field of patient care or are working to provide the administrative support and leadership that we need to keep this place running to support the mission of the school. The reputational scope would be regional for those who are associate professors and national for professors on this track. And this is the one track that is not eligible for tenure. When you look back at the history of tenure, you see that it doesn't actually fit the concept that underlies this track. Next slide, please. And as we move now to the next item on the agenda, this is the fourth track, if you will, formerly known as the Clinician and/or Educator track. It has now been redesigned with the great help of Rina Karani as the Clinician Educator or Scientist Educator track. May I have the next slide? And I'm going to let Rina tell you about this track, but the concept is what was formerly known as the CE or Clinician Educator track has been redesigned entirely. Materials have been posted. It will be soon on the faculty handbook, and we expect to accept candidates' packets for review at the beginning of January of 2023 for this new CESE track, the Clinician Scientist the Clinician Educator or Scientist Educator track, and Dr. Karani will explain that to you. Rina?
Thank you, Dr. Halpern. So good afternoon, everyone. For this part of the discussion, we are really going to spend some time looking at the review and redesign process, and I want to acknowledge the members of the Appointments and Promotions Committee and the APT staff leadership who really committed a significant amount of time over the past year to really look at and consider this track and its importance. The subcommittee did a significant amount of review, and we're going into this just to, I think, bring forward the process, which is equally important as the outcome. The internal review looked at all the website descriptions of the track that was formerly known as the Clinician and/or Educator track. We looked at all track-specific tables and materials that were available to us as faculty. And then, as you have participated in this session, there have been many sessions in the past few years that have presented the track, done workshops for faculty, had information sessions such as this, where as a committee and as a group of individuals, we have received a significant amount of feedback. And that feedback played an important role in the review process internally for this subcommittee. We also took this opportunity to do an external review. We looked at all available descriptions and criteria that were publicly available related to educator tracks at the top 20 US News and World Report research institutions, our peer group, and then spent a significant amount of time looking through a literature review of CE tracks published since 1999 to give us a sense of what the landscape was related to tracks like this, and to really think about how we could enhance and improve the experience of our faculty who are carrying forward, if you will, an absolutely core mission for the school. And then the committee members on this group brought varying perspectives. There were chairs, there were investigators, there were people who had roles as a faculty member going up for promotion on their own in their own journey, different areas of expertise, all sorts of different intersecting identities. And those perspectives, I think, contributed very valuably to the review and redesign process. Next slide, please. So here's what we learned. On the current status side, you'll see that one of the things we heard constantly and consistently was that the title, clinician and/or educator, was very confusing and missed key faculty members. Because based on this title, the or Boolean in the middle implied that somebody who was largely clinical, to Dr. Halprin's point, somebody spending 90% of their time in the critical clinical enterprise, was able to apply on this track without a large and significant educator role. And scientist educators, those who do not have a clinical title or clinical role, but who phenotypically see themselves as contributing incredibly to the education mission through all levels of our programming, did not feel at all included by a title that did not recognize their scientist role. The second status sort of that we learned a lot about was that our track expectations that we have online stated that successful dissemination of scholarly information included this appreciation for the fact that educators disseminate in many, many ways. But there was no clarity in any of our materials about what those many acceptable forms of dissemination were. And what that resulted in was what you see under impact. One is that department leaders, candidates, the committee itself really didn't know how to assess these many additional forms. And as a result, there were in many individuals, including educational and academic program leaders, who were program directors, site directors, course directors, training grant directors, clerkship directors, who had major significant educational leadership roles, but did not have sufficient numbers of what they considered peer-reviewed publications. And as a result, did not see themselves as having a home in this track. And that impact, none of the tracks that Dr. Halprin described are, sort of firewall proofed. So people would be moving between tracks. So our educational program directors without significant peer-reviewed publications might have moved into the clinical practice and or administrative leadership track, seeing the title administrative leadership. Whereas the intent of that track, administrative leadership, were clinical leaders, clinic directors, service directors, QI directors, but not the educational leaders that we hoped the clinical educator track was meant to be. Next slide, please. So there are some enhancements to the track in our new renewal. The first, as Dr. Halprin mentioned, will be a proposed title change to the track. It will be a clinician educator or scientist educator track. The subcommittee felt very strongly, and our process of feedback revealed that the title is clearer. Key in the title is the fact that the educator role is explicit and is a requirement of this track. It is less confusing for someone who is primarily clinical, that is over 90% clinical, who more appropriately fits on the clinical practice and or administrative leadership track. And we are more inclusive of the scientists who have contributed significantly to our educational mission and are consistent with our School of Medicine as well as our School of Biomedical Sciences. Next slide, please. The deeper work that we focused on was this second part, and the next slide, please. Let's talk about what we did for the second row. So here's what we have decided. We have framed two broad areas of focus that are relevant and specific to the educator faculty based on the literature. The first is that educators demonstrate a scholarly approach to their teaching and educational practice. And the second is that they conduct scholarship and or contribute to the dissemination of knowledge, broadly speaking. But for each of these two broad bucket areas that really define an educator, we wanted to create clarity in terms of the categories of work, the outputs, and roles that these individuals have. And so we focused on key areas related to educational practice, and then used the opportunity to clarify and expand the forms of scholarly dissemination in order to make it absolutely clear. Next slide, please. So as you can see on the left side of your slide, you see the two broad areas that we talked about. And on the right, you see the categories of work. There are 9 possible categories of work under scholarly approach to teaching and educational practice, and 5 categories of work related to conducting scholarship and or disseminating information. I won't read every one of them, but you can see that in terms of taking a scholarly approach to your practice, includes everything from direct teaching of broad categories of participants, developing new curricular courses, MOOCs, seminar series, or conferences, creation of novel or unique valuation or assessment methods, establishment of partnerships or programs to enhance faculty development, creation of learning opportunities for those who have been historically excluded or underserved by medicine. All the way through those 9 are the categories of work that relate to that first area. In terms of conducting scholarship, we still have our peer-reviewed publications, but we've expanded to print and media resource materials that can be for patients or lay audiences, editorial and grant review services. And the 3 that I've highlighted in red, I'm going to expand on further in the next slide and tell you what we moved forward, because as a committee, we wanted to make sure that not only were we clarifying these categories, but we wanted to offer options that can be used as evidentiary material to guide candidates, their chairs, and the committee. Next slide, please. So here is an example for each category of work, the 9 that you saw for scholarly approach and the 5 you saw for dissemination. You will see that for each category, we have provided and will have on the faculty website, on the faculty handbook website, evidentiary options to guide committee candidates and chairs at the assistant, associate, and professor levels. So here are the 3 just examples. Recognition for educational excellence. We understand and expect that assistant professors might receive site or program level recognition related to their education or scholarship. At the associate professor level, that recognition will move to the local or regional level, not the health system level, and that might begin to be invited for visiting professorships at extramural sites in the local or regional area. At the professor level, to demonstrate evidence of national impact, the awards will move to the national or international level. The professorships will be also at the national or international level. In distinction, a category like textbooks and book chapters at the assistant professor level, we did not feel that there was a need or an expectation for an assistant professor to have that as part of their evidence. At the associate professor level, we begin to expect authorship of chapters and textbooks, for example. And at the professor level, the opportunity for individuals to show that they're taking on much more of a leadership role as in editorial roles. For presentations, awards, and grants, just another example here. At the assistant professor level, faculty might be invited to another health system site for workshops or invited talks. At the associate professor level, that might move to the regional level beyond the health system. They might be invited to participate in webinars, and they might begin to get recognition at the local or regional level for their scholarship, mentorship, or other activities. They might, as a scientist educator, be included on a training grant as an investigator. At the professor level, the sort of expectation moves up to the national or international level. And also now, if you think of the training grant example, moving to the PI role. So as you can see, one of the things we've tried to do is to be extremely explicit, and each one of those 14 categories of work will have options for evidentiary information that the candidate can look at, explicitly think through, discuss during mentorship meetings, and really build their portfolio for submission to APT. Next slide, please. Excuse me. We also wanted to make sure we clarified those educational and academic administrative leadership roles that are appropriate for this track. We describe those in terms of the category. At the assistant professor level, there's no evidentiary expectation that an assistant professor will have those leadership roles. And then from the associate to the full professor level, again, the leadership roles emerging as an associate professor, maybe at the assistant level, the associate director level, or a site director level, and then moving up to being the leadership role of an academic program as the director or at the health system level. But also building that as an educational leader, there are expectations of taking a continuous quality improvement lens to think about the program and your leadership of it. And then also the idea of leadership beginning to serve on education-related committees at the site and health system level, and eventually serving in leadership roles as the professor level. One of the most important things that the committee did was to focus very deeply on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that that is a driving mission at Mount Sinai and nationally. And rather than separate out our expectation related to this work, we wove in our DEI elements into the track so that educators can actually have their work as related to DEI demonstrated and valued and respected as they go up for promotion. So this is just one example of how it was woven into the category of direct teaching. You can see that there are contributions related to the efforts to ensure how learners are treated. And then as you go up in rank, the expectation for evidence would be leadership in that kind of an effort. So that is just one area that you will see the DEI elements woven into our evidentiary sources. Next slide, please. So in summary, as you can see, the two rows, again, very familiar now to you about the track, the impact, and what our enhancements are. And next slide, please. I want to share how critical the feedback we have received has been. This track has been presented to a range of faculty and leadership across the health system, committees that are deeply involved in thinking about the needs of those who are underrepresented and or vulnerable populations of our faculty, and tremendous input has been received that really led to the final track as we've presented today, being approved by our legal team and our dean as well. Next slide. And so the next steps, as Dr. Halperin mentioned, is our planned rollout is for January 2023. We will shortly have new faculty handbook materials that will be available for review. In terms of how evidentiary materials will be collected for this track, we have made some modifications to the Sinai CV format. As you know, the Sinai CV format is for anyone and everyone across all tracks. So the modifications to that are very small and specific and applicable across all tracks. We will be launching a new Clinician Educator, Scientist Educator track matrix, as Simo was talking about the clinical practice and administrative leadership matrix. We will have a matrix that will be an addendum to the CV. It is not an educator's portfolio that will require reams and reams of information. It is summative and allows you to really document the evidence of work conducted in these evidentiary categories, but also to provide evidence of outcomes. And this is just the beginning of our system-wide presentations. As a committee, we are extremely committed to sharing information broadly and as many times as is needed. We really want to support you as faculty. We want to support the chairs who have been mentoring and guiding our faculty for promotion and address any questions. And so we will be sending out an email to every department. We will make sure we come and present in any forum that feels helpful. I think that might be my last slide.
All right, so thank you so much. This has been really, really informative. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Ben, I am an Associate Dean for Faculty Wellbeing and Development in the Office of Faculty Development, and I am an Associate Professor here at Sinai. The questions kind of fall in a few different categories, but I'm going to start with some of the general questions. So, very general question. How do we know if we're ready to submit the promotion application?
So let me start with this. First of all, you should talk with your either department chair, or in some departments, there might be a appointments and promotions individual who's been assigned to council faculty, or a departmental APT committee or equivalent. You want to go to those folks, show them your CV. It should be part of your annual faculty review meeting with your department chair to discuss what has been achieved, set goals and expectations for the period ahead, and determine exactly what is needed for you to advance to the next step in the faculty. That's the place to begin. And when your chair is ready, and that chair should have the experience to guide you properly with respect to that, they should help by providing a very supportive chair statement that will inform the APT committee of exactly how you contribute to the mission of the department, to the school.
And to add to that, many departments do have an internal appointments and promotions committee. So a few of their faculty get together and review CVs on a periodic basis.
Okay, thank you. We're hoping that this won't happen, but what happens if someone's promotion request is rejected?
So if it rejected at the departmental level requires a discussion with the departmental leadership or APT or appointments and promotions committee chair of the department. When it reaches the school level, reaches the appointments, promotions, and tenure committee for the School of Medicine, the first step is a pre-evaluation process. That is to say, an informal review by members of the committee, either for basic science or for clinical science, or people will always find a pre-evaluation group that will look sensitively at the packet that's been submitted and says, is this person requesting advancement on the right track? And do they look like they have a sufficient CV, chair statement? And are the materials there to support this before we agree to send the materials to external reviewers? If we see a fundamental issue, the wrong track has been, or what we perceive to be the wrong track has been selected, or if we simply don't think the candidate is yet ready for advancement, we're not going to reject. We're going to go back to the department and say, here's what we think is missing. This is what should be provided before this candidate would be ready for comprehensive review. And then finally, when we receive input from external reviewers, which in many ways is the black box to all of us. We don't know what the external reviewers will say, but if they come back and they're uniformly supportive, that will certainly facilitate approval of the requested promotion. But if we see resistance or objection or hesitation from those external reviewers, we may decide to table the review at that point, and again go back to the department chair and say, we think there are some concerns here. Here are the concerns. Here are the deficiencies or insufficiencies that have been identified. Perhaps the candidate would like to address this and then resubmit. We very rarely will vote no. We will almost always identify what the problem is and go back to the department and make a recommendation for what can be done to fix up this candidacy. Hopefully, most of that is identified at the pre-evaluation level before we go for external review. But sometimes the external reviewers will identify issues, perhaps that we weren't aware of in terms of the candidate's external performance, in which case we'll go back to the department, say, here are the concerns.
Okay, it's nice to know that it's not so cut and dry. How do multiple appointments affect promotion? So if someone has multiple appointments, maybe a primary, a secondary appointment, this person wanted to know how that affects promotion, and also, is it easier to be promoted if you just have one appointment? Like, is it Does it make things more complicated having multiple appointments?
No, it doesn't. Typically, what happens is the primary department, every faculty member has a primary department, and the chair of that department should, if the chair agrees with the anticipated promotion, should secure the approval of the chairs of the other departments, the secondary or tertiary departments. And we ask that all three or two, whatever the number of chairs might be, co-sign the chair statement indicating their support for advancement. So there's no reason to think that having multiple department affiliations would either slow or speed the process of approval.
That's helpful. Thank you. Is it possible to go be promoted, kind of almost skip a rank? Can you be promoted from instructor to associate professor? Or do you usually have to go,
Yeah, no, the
in
answer
order?
is yes. Based on one of the principles that I mentioned at the outset, that we believe every faculty member should be in the correct track, most appropriate track for their nature of their work, but also at the correct rank. We have many individuals whose time has passed by and they have not been advanced as rapidly as they should have been. When someone finally wakes up in the department and says, yo, this person's been here for a long time and they're sitting at a much lower rank than they deserve, we certainly can skip tracks when it's appropriate to do so. That's unusual because in most departments there is a constructive process to identify people when they're ready for advancement and move them forward. But if that hasn't happened for some reason, then we certainly are open to the idea of leapfrogging a rank when it's appropriate to do so, and moving people into a senior faculty rank when they did not have one previously. I should point out that for those who are at the level of instructor, there is no track, because we think you're still finding your place in the world of science and clinical care here at Mount Sinai. So instructor is a level at which we have not assigned a track, but once you reach the level of assistant professor, the track should become clear. And if you're not comfortable with that track, you should talk with your department chair. Think about the tracks like an Aztec temple. There are 4 walls that have to be mounted. They reach a certain plane or academic rank. And the criteria for advancement may differ based on the nature of an individual faculty's pursuits, such as the new ones that have been outlined by Dr. Karani today for our new Clinician Educator or Scientist Educator track. And this is a way to advance because we're counting things, we're looking at things in a constructive way. Once you reach that next level of associate professor, all faculty are equal in terms of their value at that level. Okay, and then the stair mounts again to the next level. So the different ways to get promoted are related to what you are doing and whether you've met the criteria for that track.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to direct this next question to Seema Patel, but everyone else can chime in if you'd like. This is about compensation. Is promotion the only pathway for a review of current compensation?
No, I mean, that's also going back to the faculty appraisals. That's a good time to talk about your compensation with your chair during your year-end performance appraisal. And if you don't want to wait for that, you can always approach your chair and or vice chair, or whoever in your department handles those issues with the faculty, to have a conversation about your comp at any point in time. It's not tied to your faculty promotion at all.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, that's helpful. How do the requirements for tenure differ from requirements for promotion?
So first of all, tenure is available at the associate professor level as well as at the professor level. Once granted tenure, it carries forward, of course, to the next rank. Someone with tenure at the associate professor level would be tenured at the professor level when they reach that point. Tenure is a kind of a tried, it's a tradition in academics, originally designed to provide for intellectual protection of freedoms. You could reach a point where you may have ideas that are unconventional, and you will not be dismissed from the faculty because you have unconventional ideas. That was the history of tenure, was to protect academic freedom and intellectual freedom. It's changed in its context over time. It guarantees that your role, the institution has made an investment in you, and you don't have to reapply after a set period of time for reappointment. Your reappointment is guaranteed when you have tenure. You are also guaranteed a certain financial level, but it's not necessarily your full compensation. In fact, it falls to be the minimum base salary for rank, and most people can't live on that in New York City, okay? So don't view it as financial security, but it is security of your position, that the institution has made a commitment to you based on your convincing the committee that you are going to remain productive, that you're going to continue to deliver on your promise of high quality science, high quality education, high quality clinical care, whatever the criteria might be for the track in which you're promoted. The reason that we don't have tenure on the clinical practice and or administrative leadership track is that those tracks are not fundamentally based on academic concepts being protected. And the understanding is that permanence depends on your own productivity, not on a promise of intellectual productivity in the future. And so that's the one track on the full-time faculty that does not have tenure available. But all of the other three tracks, the newly developed CE/SE track that Dr. Karani reviewed, is a tenure eligible track. The research track is tenure eligible, and the investigator track is tenure eligible.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask a question here around this new kind of Scientist Educator track, or I guess this isn't new, but kind of this expansion of the Clinician Educator track. How do you weight mentoring PhD students? How do you weight mentoring trainees in the Scientist Educator track when you're reviewing someone's package for promotion?
I can take that. So Emma, that is not an expectation of any one specific track. Mentorship of trainees, participation in the teaching mission of the institution, service and advocacy work related to serving on committees within the institution, diversity, equity, and inclusion work are all part of the expectation of every single faculty member at the health system. And so the mentorship table that is present in the CV is exactly that, to capture the extent and depth and outcomes of our mentorship activities. And so across the board, that is valued. There is, to my knowledge, and Dr. Halpern can correct me if I'm wrong, there is not a single committee meeting or membership group or subcommittee that counts how many you've mentored and, parses that out. But a dedication to mentorship of trainees and other upcoming young faculty members is an expectation of all of us across all the ranks and tracks.
Thank you for kind of emphasizing that. Dr. Halpern, you wanted to?
No, just to say I'm fully in agreement with her.
Should faculty in the Clinician Educator or Scientist Educator track, should they have like an educational profile or some type of at different institutions for those who are teaching? Sometimes they have a teaching philosophy, or they have different types of things. Should they have an educational profile in addition to the CV, or really folks should really still be trying to kind of integrate what they're doing into kind of the teaching component of their CV, or their impact, or their all of those things? Do you want to see something more from?
We do, and that is going to be the new matrix. It is not an education portfolio, which would begin with an educational philosophy statement. However, as someone in educational leadership, I'm sure Dr. Pecorella would also agree, having a philosophical statement about your educational work serves multiple purposes, if not for APT, for applying for grants, for applying for funding, for presenting at certain places. They'd like to have that as part of your portfolio. And so having something like that available is not a bad use of your time. However, for advancement and promotion on the CESE track, it will be a modification to the CV, which everybody will do. We will all have to update our CVs to be in compliance with the new CV format and the new matrix that will be parallel to the evidentiary tables that we presented. That will be short, succinct, showing sort of how you do demonstrate the information and the impact of that work.
Okay, thank you.
May I just ask
Go
a quick
ahead.
follow-up to that? Because I
Mhm.
think there was a question related to that, Rena, which you may have answered actually in the chat, which was about will we have to, like, if we're in the clinician educator track, do we have to do something to get into the new track? Or do we just have to wait till our next promotion and then worry about it then?
Yes, and I would say one other thing would be making sure, no matter when you're going up for promotion again, to update your CV now, though. That level of work, I think having an accurate Sinai format for the CV will require updating now, but should not be hard at all.
What we've tried to create here is a CV that fits all faculty in all tracks. It's a little, and not feel like, gee, they're asking me stuff that doesn't fit my track quite as much as the former Sinai formatted CV seemed to do. And the track-specific information is being moved into a so-called matrix or supplement. We already have one for the clinical practice and administrative leadership track. We now will have one for the clinician educator or scientist educator track. And as time goes by, we will build a matrix for folks on the research track and on the investigator track. That work has not yet been completed by the APT committee, but we'll be doing that in the months ahead.
Okay, so I think there's a question that came up in the Q&A. Can you help one understand for, a new physician scientist, for example, can you help us understand how would they decide whether they should be on the investigator or the scientist educator track?
Rena, do you want to start with that, or would you like me?
Sure, I can take a stab, Dr. Halpern, and then I think it'd be great to have your input. My sense is that an investigator is spending a significant amount of their time in their early career building their independent research portfolio with mentorship support, with the eventual goal of becoming an independently funded investigator, spending the vast majority of their time with supported funding from a governmental source or a closely related governmental source. If that is the narrative of the arc of your work, then it is very, very likely that you are on the investigator track, and that would still need to be in discussion with your chair. A scientist who is participating in research, but has a significant role and interest in teaching and is building that portfolio of work along with participating in research, but with no understanding or expectation that they're going to become an independently funded researcher, and their teaching and educational portfolio is in discussion with their chair and based on the work and how they're spending their time, I would imagine that that individual would be more appropriate for the scientist educator track.
I agree.
Halpern?
I think that's very well said. I think we look at the trajectory of the individual's career, where you are today, where you will be in the future. If your future is to become an independently, federally funded investigator directing an individual research, an independent research program, you are probably appropriately on the investigator track. If you're directing a core facility that many investigators make use of and that you contribute to their ability to gain funding, you probably belong on the research track. If, as Dr. Karani said, a substantial proportion of your time effort is participating in science and educating others, I think your role is probably best going to be on the CE, the new Clinician Educator or Scientist Educator track, this thing that has grown out of the Clinician Educator track, to help better distinguish it from folks who are clinical practice administrative leaders.
Thank you. I don't know, while this question seems like there's an easy answer, I'm going to imagine that the answer is not so easy. And the question is, how many R01 or equivalent grants do you need for promotion on the investigator track?
I'll answer that by saying there is no number as long as it's 1 or greater, okay? We don't count publications, we don't count grants. We're looking at the totality of the packet. Now, obviously, it's like a publication in the world's leading scientific journal is worth many publications in a lesser journal. The impact of the work, the promise of the work for a future scientific advancement, all of those things go into the equation. It's not a matter of counting it. We don't weigh the CV on a scale and then make a judgment. We try to assess the overall value of the contributions and promise for future development.
I want to come back to this tracker, Seema.
Yeah.
There was a question that we got that really is about like how long it takes for, to be determined whether someone is going to get promoted. But there's this pre-evaluation phase, there's all of these, phases. Do you have a time kind of on average that people should expect? I mean, I think the tracker really just helps now for folk to know where things are at. But is there like a timeline that people should be anticipating?
Yeah, I would say no more than 3 months at this point. It all really depends on the external reviewers writing letters, right? We have applications where we send them out and we get a bunch within the 3 weeks. And then we have others where we're like every month, we're like, write a letter, so it really just depends on reviewers. What we have started is, well, not started, it's been a year in now. We send out notifications to the candidates, we send notifications to the departments on where applications are, what kind of the pinpoints are, right? Please nudge your reviewers to send letters. We haven't received, we've only received 2, we need a few more. We put in place a lot of stopgaps that help us move applications pretty quickly now. Within the last year and a half, we've really made a lot of changes to improve the turnaround time of applications. And if people reach out all the time and say like, where's my application? I'm happy to give a status update whenever people need.
No, but we're going to take advantage of this tracker.
Yes.
We all need to take advantage of this. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pecorello to close us out.
I just wanted to thank our panelists first and foremost for the time they took to both prepare this talk and to spend with us and to also work so hard on the new track, which is really exciting. Please feel free to email us at ofd@mssm.edu with any additional questions. I know there were some personal questions that folks had about their promotion, so email us and we will direct you to the right people to help answer those questions. And we will also be providing the slide set as well as the video for this session probably within the next few weeks, as well as, which may take a little longer, but a comprehensive document with basically the Q&A from today's session as well as previous sessions so that you can easily find the answers to all of your questions. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon and thank you so much for joining us.